to episode number 58 of Gar Borras' Time Machine. This is the second episode we're doing for the new year, 2024. Gar, we took a few weeks off, but it's great to be talking again. Today I thought we'd do something fun, and we're gonna look back on the history of Dragnet. But now people probably think I'm talking about the Dragnet TV show. Now that came later, so what I kind of when I came up with the idea to do an episode on Dragnet, I came across, interesting enough, there was before it was ever a Dragnet TV show or movie or anything like that, there was an old time radio show. I mean, that's how Dragnet got its start, is on the radio, and then it transitioned into a TV show. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. Now, I assume, like me, Gar, you weren't around back then, but let's talk about it. Did you get a chance to check out any of the Dragnet radio clips I sent you?
Wow, yeah, I didn't really understand that part of it.
Yeah.
When we were talking about that, it was going to be about the radio, so I did prep more for the TV show.
Well, I'll tell you what we can do is, since I did do some research on the radio show, I think what we could do then is I'll talk a little bit about the radio show, and then you can talk about the TV show. So we'll just kind of make it a Dragnet episode. Okay. So here's what I got. Now, the original release date for the radio show was, it ran on the radio from June 3rd, 1949 to July 26th in 1957. So about 11-year run. That's pretty good. And Dragnet was an American radio series that premiered on NBC Radio for a total of 8 years. The show lasted for 9 seasons, a total of 314 episodes now, Gar. And the reason, again, that I thought to do this is because in one of our past episodes, when we did an episode on I Love Lucy, we came across the fact that before there was ever an I Love Lucy, she was on a radio show called My Famous Husband, and that's kind of sparked the idea for I Love Lucy. And so I'm very interested to learn even things like, they also had a radio show for Twilight Zone. I mean, it was a radio show first, very much like Dragnet, and it's kind of interesting to see how things transition from the radio to the big screen.
Well, it was during that time period.
Yeah.
Where it was a transitional time period, because radio was going strong
until TV.
TV was this new medium, and the same things were going on back then. As to the same comparison as to when the internet first got introduced to the public, way back in the 1950s.
Sure.
TV, people were talking about TV that it was a fad. It wasn't gonna really, you know what I mean. There was a lot of people that were really not taking TV seriously, and just kind of hemming and hawing about the TV aspect of it, and we're kind of like, radio was, their thing, and just like the internet, people were saying that, when the internet was first becoming popular with the public, they were saying, "Oh, it's just a fad. It's not going to stick."
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. So that same type of thing was happening back in the 1950s with the transition from radio to TV.
And it's interesting. Years later, we do these episodes, Gar, and it's interesting, because we weren't there back, when these radio shows were on. But it's very interesting. You got. Also on the radio at that time, you had like Abbott and Costello. We mentioned Lucille Ball. It's interesting to see how these people on the radio were able to transition from their voice just being known as voices on the radio to like TV, and then some of them would even go on to make movies on the big screen. And so like somebody like Jack Webb, it's interesting because he was a guy that created Dragnet, wrote it, and we're going to get into that a little bit now, but he's, again, a guy that was on the radio and originally, not necessarily a great-looking movie star like a Burt Reynolds or Paul Newman or somebody like that, but yet he was able to transition from the radio onto the TV. Now, as I was saying, Dragnet was written, created, and starred Jack Webb. Webb was born John Randolph Webb, Webb starred as the show's main character, Detective Joe Friday. And again, we gotta remember that this was initially on the radio, so it took a while to kind of create the characters and the storylines, but like Joe Friday is kind of a household name to anybody who was around, back in the 50s and the 60s when Dragnet, kind of was first created, and then to be able to take it from the radio to now you're seeing somebody, the same guy that was on the radio, playing the part on TV. So now it's not just hearing his voice, it's seeing him act the part out, I think he was able to do it quite successfully.
Yeah, well, when I was doing the research, he was really not too keen on him being Detective Friday. He wanted somebody that was a little more Hollywood, looks to the character, and the producers of the show, they just wouldn't have it because the public was so latched on to his voice.
Yeah.
That it just, they couldn't justify not continuing on, even though he didn't have the Hollywood look.
Yeah. And
it turns out it didn't matter anyways because it was a little bit of a different thing, when you're talking about like cops. You don't have to have Hollywood looks.
No.
To portray a cop. So it really turned out to be a concern on Jack Webb's part that was really, something that he really didn't need to be concerned about.
Yeah, and I think, too, why it worked for him is because, like we said, the radio show itself had been on for 8 years, but by the time it kind of run its course and they'd taken it off the radio. And so by the time the TV show comes around, it's like, hey, that's, the guy they got in the TV show. He's a guy that's Joe Friday. That's the voice I heard on the radio. So I think that's part of the reason it worked, because the audience had already kind of latched on to that voice.
Yeah, and the show, when it went into the 50s, just to kind of get a feel for it.
Yeah.
I went on YouTube and watched some of the episodes and stuff like that.
Sure.
And to be honest with you, I mean, I was around when that was on TV and everything like that, but the only episodes that I really remember was from the reboot.
Oh, okay.
The reboot that they did back in the late 60s, and that's where they introduced Harry Morgan as his partner.
Okay.
And that, to be honest with you, those are, as far as my personal memory.
Sure.
Those are the episodes that I remember. I do not remember as a kid watching any episodes that didn't have Harry Morgan as Jack Webb's partner. And it's so kind of weird because, in doing the research for this episode, I totally found out that this show had a long history.
Yeah.
Before Harry Morgan was ever even introduced.
Now, Gar, do you think that because you were around when the original show was on? Were you not, or was it? Did it have more to do? You were younger at the time, and you did Dragnet.
It ran back in the basically for almost the entire decade of the 1950s.
Sure.
I wasn't born.
Okay, makes
until
sense.
1956.
Okay, it's interesting.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So, my whole childhood, when I was too young during that time period, and then by the time I started becoming a young child in the 60s, that's where the reboot was all over the place, and that's where I remember. And it was such a shock to me when I was doing the research. I thought that Harry Morgan was just part of it, and it was part of the history and everything like that. And I find out that doing the research that no, what I remember was only just a slice of the history of the entire show.
Oh, that's quite unique, and that's why we do these episodes. I mean, I can tell you from my perspective, I wasn't born until 1971, but I'm aware of Dragnet because all throughout my life I came across it like on some of these retro channels that they have reruns on, like Antenna TV and TV Land and stuff like that, and they would play the old Jack Webb episodes, and of course those are in black and white. So again, talking a little bit about the history of Dragnet, it transitions from the radio into the original TV show with Jack Webb, who is, and I kind of compare it to the Twilight Zone, because very much like the Twilight Zone, Rod Sterling was the creator, the guy that wrote it, the main kind of force behind it. And so Jack Webb was kind of the same thing to Dragnet, and so it makes sense that they would want him in the first TV show when they first launched that. And I think it's kind of a unique story that you because I wasn't even aware of it. There was this other series you're talking about, so that's kind of cool that we've both kind of stumbled onto something new here. But I'm sure by the time Dragnet gets a reboot that was your Dragnet, you know what I mean, Gar? It had another thing in the reboot. I'm sure they had colorized it by then.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's another thing, because when I was watching that's kind of a little bit of what makes the combination of you and I doing the show is because you bring to the time machine the view as a retro fan in watching it on these retro TV shows. And when I'm going back in my memory banks, I'm actually, talking about when it was actually on.
Yeah.
During that time period, instead of watching it on the retro TV shows.
Yeah.
And back when it was brand new and it was being shown back in those days, it was all black and white.
Yeah.
And when I went back and started watching the episodes, to get a feel for this, I noticed that it was colorized, and there's all of the these things that have been done since I remember watching the show when I was a kid.
Now when we talk about your Dragnet with what was the actor's name you said?
Harry Morgan. Now Harry Morgan became more popular as his character on MASH.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And which also brings up, there had been a number of reboots of Dragnet that were spearheaded by Jack Webb, and back in in the early 1980s, Jack Webb wanted to do another reboot.
Okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just like there's like a bunch of reboots of the show, and it's just, if he would, the only reason why they didn't do the reboot in the early 80s is because in 1982 Jack Webb had passed away.
Yeah.
And then they decided, well, he was the life force of the show, so without him we can't really do it. So they didn't really, continue on without him.
Smart move on their part. Now, the interesting thing is, like you say, Harry Morgan was your Dragnet because that was the show you watched. But now, let me ask: when you got and you watched some of the old episodes, black and white episodes with Jack Webb, how good of a job do you think he did as Joe Friday, based on the original TV show?
Well, there's so many aspects of Joe Friday, that make it so original.
Yeah.
And so if you try to change it, it just changes everything and just throws everything out of whack. And what I mean by that is his monotone voice.
Yeah.
that part of it, if you took that out of it and you changed that, it really changes the whole thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
the monotone voice is part of the identity of that show.
Yeah, I think it's the first TV show or first kind of one of those shows, very much like Get Smart. Originally was kind of like Don Adams, like kind of had a dry humor. He was kind of matter of factly. That's how Joe Friday originally was, and then the more of a show went on, they kind of developed what he morphed into. Kind of like a bumbling idiot, but lovable idiot. But he always seemed to, by the end of the show, the case would be solved.
Yeah, but it's there's a formula there, and I think that's probably why the producers, when it transitioned from a radio show to a TV show, didn't want to mess with that chemistry.
Yeah.
And having him and having that monotone voice continuing from the radio show to the TV show was a critical transference.
Yeah, and that's another thing, Gar. Let's talk about that now. I mean, as far as let's go back to the radio show, because back then they had all kind. They had the Lone Ranger, they had Batman and Superman, they had Abbott, they had all these different. My Favorite Husband with Lucille Ball, we mentioned. My point is, Dragnet, I think, was the first time they had any type of radio show like dedicated to talking about the police, police cases and that. I mean, today we have all these different, police dramas and stuff. It's kind of become, not as popular as it once was, but you know what I mean? It's an old hat at this point. But at that time, that's the first time they had anything kind of dedicated to talking about police detectives, and I think that's what made it kind of stand out at the time.
Well, yeah, and that's another thing. We have Dragnet to thank for all the other cop shows that followed.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? There's always a trailblazer for virtually everything that we know today, and and Dragnet. Jack Webb and Dragnet, because you can't refer to one without the other.
Yeah.
But the two together, were the spearhead that started the whole genre. And established it for everything to follow.
And like we've been talking, the Dragnet radio show was the first entry in the Dragnet media franchise, which would go on to include like television shows, like we talked about, books, and even comic books. And I think at that point, when you get into comic books, you've kind of made it. Your place in pop culture is kind of, I think, at that point sealed.
Well, yeah, your place in pop culture.
Yeah, in history, period. I think. Yeah. And now, any idea, Gar, what the term Dragnet means?
Well, we both did the research.
Yeah.
It's a method that the police use to catch criminals.
Yeah.
At the time, it was a very trendy name to put on the show. Nowadays we look at it, because it's so old hat and everything like that.
Now, Gar, I got it.
At the time, it was it was very edgy for the time.
Now, Gar, I got to add this little bit of trivia to what Dragnet means, because I think you and the audience are going to love this. The term Dragnet comes from a fishing technique of dragging a fishing net across the bottom of a sea through a promising area of open water.
Well, okay. So that is the original
term.
Definition.
That's where they got the
and it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
For fishing, and that I totally get it.
Yeah, and as far as these methods that were used to catch the criminals in each episode, they include things such as, in the storylines, traffic stops, barricades, widespread DNA tests. I mean, this is DNA, I guess, is back then in the 50s, you're kind of hearing rumblings about DNA, but it was nowhere near what it is today. You know.
Oh yeah. It's a to be honest with you, I think DNA it is the most revolutionary method that the police department has come up with to date.
Sure.
To really seal the deal that they caught the perpetrator, the person that is guilty. And there's certain aspects of our society that doesn't like that.
Yeah.
Me personally, because I'm not really up to anything where I need to be looking over my shoulder.
Yeah.
I'm just a musician, making an honest living. I don't have anything to worry, so I don't have any problem with something like that. DNA. But there are certain elements of our society that has a problem with it. But I personally don't.
I will just add this about DNA. It's great for determining if somebody commits a crime, if somebody was, framed, if somebody's spent the last 30 years of their life in jail for a crime they didn't really commit. But it's also used for other things. It's also used to, health-wise, finding treatments for diseases and stuff, and people doing their family tree, and oftentimes people that were adopted, they through their DNA and stuff like that, they can find maybe who their birth parents were and stuff like that. It's used for all kinds of things.
So, way more than anybody had ever envisioned. When DNA and all that started, nobody had any idea it was going to go that far. But you look at all the modern police type of shows, the NCISs and all that stuff. It's all about the modern technology that the police use to catch criminals and murderers and rapists and serial killers and all of that stuff, and it's really mind-boggling. To me, to know that the police have that such advanced methods, it actually makes me feel safer. It makes me feel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That we're having the upper hand over people that don't have good intentions. But all of these modern shows like NCIS, they all have Dragnet.
To think. Yeah. And even talking a little more about the DNA, and crime solving, they also use it in crime solving in the sense of, anytime they have a serial murder or a child molester, somebody like that on the loose, they oftentimes will use the DNA and they'll find, oh, wait a minute, these 2 or 3 children, they were molested by the same molester, and they can find the stuff out even if it's 20 years after the fact, and they find out, oh wait, this guy did, he hurt all these people, he killed all these women, and it's amazing that years later they can do stuff like that.
Yes, and I'm all for it myself.
Yeah, and here's some more fun stuff. What were
you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, another thing I thought that was cool about Dragnet that I learned, it says, to this day, Dragnet remains the most famous, influential police drama in all media history because the series helped to educate the public on the danger and heroism of police work. Dragnet was praised for the way it helped to change the public opinion of police officers for the better. All of a sudden, the general public had a much higher respect and appreciation of police officers everywhere. And just compare that to the world today and all this defund the police and what people think of police today. It's a different world, different time.
It's apples and oranges.
Yeah.
But back in those days, that was part of the reason why the LAPD supported the show Dragnet so much is and they really played a big part in supplying him with the information and the storyline fuel that he needed for the show. He was very lockstep with them in working together in coming up with a lot of the stuff that they used in the show.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
And he, the agreement with him, was that he was, the reason why they really did that and did it for such a long time is because he showed, the LAPD in a positive light, because in the I think it was like the 30s and the 40s, the LA Police Department was widely known that the LAPD was corrupt.
Yeah.
During that time period, and so the Dragnet had a lot to do with having a more positive
image.
Yeah. It was during the 30s and the 40s. It was widely known that LAPD was corrupt.
I'm glad you brought all that up because I came across all that information too, and what it said was the origins for Dragnet came from Jack Webb's small role as a police forensic scientist in the 1948 film. It didn't say what the film. It was He Walked by Night. His part of a 1948 film, He Walked by Night. Marty Wynn was an actual LAPD sergeant who was a technical advisor on the film. He gave him many of his actual LAPD cases that you were saying. And so after they do this film, he kind of comes up with the idea for Dragnet, and then the radio show launches. And throughout the history of the Dragnet radio show and even the TV show, that's not just how they got a lot of ideas. They based a lot of those storylines on actual cases from the files of the LAPD. And I think they would even put that up on the screen when they would do the little introduction each episode, at the top of the show.
Well, that narration that he did at the beginning of the show was just as famous as the show. That narration has been repeated in all kinds of parodies and everything. Your head would spin at how many times that opening monologue, it has been reused and in different ways.
Garvey, the only other thing I can really compare it to that I think you'll agree with me is, look up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane, no, it's Superman.
Yes, just like that.
Yeah.
Being repeated and everything like that. They say the ultimate flattery is when somebody does a
kind of a copy,
does an impression of you.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate flattery, is when someone does an impression of you, and that opening monologue. A lot of people flattered Jack Webb, in coming up with different ways to utilize just that opening monologue.
And for Jack Webb, just kind of being an actor and a guy that was on the radio and a writer, if you watch Dragnet, especially the original series that he was in, or listen to a radio show, they were really great at, they had the police jargon down, and they were really precise, and they had all the terms, and the reason they were able to do that, reportedly, it said Jack Webb went on actual police rides with Sergeant Wynn, frequently visited the LAPD headquarters to help him learn police jargon, to also help him learn proper police protocol.
Well, to bring reality to the show.
And I think they
have
did
the
that.
characters actually, be realistic.
Yeah, and I think it worked for that reason alone. Could you imagine if he just kind of tried to write a lot of this stuff on his own? It wouldn't come across as authentic, and that's what I think Dragnet was. It was comedy, but yet it had authenticity because he took the time to learn about what the police actually did.
Yeah, in doing the research, there are a lot of people that suspect that that Jack Webb, ultimately really wanted to be a cop.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think it's an assumption, but it's a pretty safe assumption to think that he probably did, simply because, his whole body of work is all about police work. I don't think that he has anything that's a part of the body of work that he's famous for that doesn't have anything to do with police work.
Yeah, and Gar, it's interesting because you look at other stuff that came later, like Kojak starring Telly Savalas, or even T.J. Hooker with William Shatner. Especially you go back to Kojak. I mean, it's almost like I wonder, okay, somebody got the idea. Okay, let's have a Dragnet type thing, but we're going to be more of a drama. We're going to be more serious. We're going to have this, great detective. Yet I'm almost willing to bet that a lot of it was like, let's try to be the next Dragnet, if you know what I mean.
Well, this really shows how old I am.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of things that I remember about Kojak.
Yeah.
Number one, his famous line from that show was, "Who loves you, baby?" And the other thing that he was known for on that show was he had a penchant for suckers.
Yeah. And, talk about Kojak, for a minute. I'm kind of, we're both, I think, kind of putting our age out there, because even I'm old enough to remember Kojak and Telly Savalas. A lot of people listening is like, Telly Savalas, who the hell's Telly? Look it up, Kojak.
Back in the 70s, that was a hugely popular show, but then again, just like we're always going back and saying, without Dragnet, you don't have Kojak.
That's so true, and I think another thing we're going to bring up Kojak that's interesting to look back on is Telly Savalas was, I think, one of the first guys to kind of just be himself, be that bald actor. He wasn't ashamed of it. He shaved his head, he didn't have any hair, whatever. But yet he was able to go on and have that star power,
Yeah, he's back in the 70s. Telly Savalas.
He was huge.
Was a huge factor in other men shaving their head just like he did.
That's what I'm talking about. Gar, even
he started a whole thing back in those days by doing that.
Yeah, and Gar, even so much, Telly Savalas was so huge at that time that I even remember he appeared on an episode of Alice.
Yeah, he was the guy that started the trend of shaving your head.
Yeah, and that's why I brought that up. I mean, he was the first one.
You see all these men now with shaved heads, and they have no idea who the person is that started that trend.
It wasn't The Rock, okay?
No.
Yeah.
We're talking all the way back to the 70s.
Yeah. Now, here's another fun fact. When Jack Webb first approached NBC with his idea for the Dragnet radio show, NBC was not impressed with the idea because at the time, like I was saying, radio was swarmed with other police shows and private eye programs such as Jack Webb's own, Pat Novak for Hire. It was another detective show he was in. It was kind of like, I guess, a pre-Dragnet, and they were kind of like, well, that's kind of already on the radio, but they decided to try out this Dragnet idea because they said, okay, he's had some success on the radio, so we'll give this a shot.
Well, sometimes all you need is a foot in the door.
And then, again, originally NBC said, we're just going to do this for a limited run, but it eventually took off that they went on to be on there for 8 years,
Well, we're talking about a long, successful radio, duration.
Before he was ever on TV.
Followed by the TV show that stayed on TV for a long duration, and then wound up getting rebooted back in the late 60s and stayed on TV for another long duration.
Yeah,
and the number I found out when I was doing the research for this is that the main reason why Jack Webb decided he wanted to do the reboot in the late 60s was because of the hippies and drug use and heroin and LSD. All of those were going on at that time, and so he wanted to do the reboot to kind of focus on that area of law enforcement. You know what I mean? To show the public the detriments of drug use and all of that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And that was his motivation for doing the first reboot back in the late 60s.
And again, going back to the very beginnings of a radio show, the Dragnet radio show was not an immediate hit, Gar, but which is why initially the show only had a small cast of actors to depend on each week. And then, of course, as the show grew and got more popular, they created more characters and more storylines. And again, like we said, it went on to become, be on the air for like 8 years. Jack Webb's character of Joe Friday went from being a more brash and forceful character, can you imagine, to being the more lovable, flat demeanor, fast-talking persona of a Detective Joe Friday would go on to be known for from that point on. Joe Friday was thought of as a cop's cop, though, but not too harsh or conservative, but caring.
Well, that would be what everybody would want the cops to be. You know what I mean? So he was just trying to be the cop's cop.
And again, it shows you that when they first start doing the radio show, they're kind of developing these characters. They don't really have a key lock on who Joe Friday was, but then they probably decide, okay, we don't want him being so brash. We want him to be a little more caring, more so the audience can kind of be in love with him, and more of a bumbling idiot. And that's kind of who he is to this day when you think of Joe Friday.
Yeah, it's forever everyone will associate Jack Webb with Joe Friday. They are one person. They are the same person.
And Joe Friday, what a simple name.
And in that regard, that makes him an icon.
Sure. No argument.
The craziest thing is if he was alive today, and anybody brought that up, that he had become an icon, I think that would blow his mind.
Yeah.
I think he would have a hard time getting his mind wrapped around that kind of an achievement, because it's something you it's not what you're working for. It's not your goal.
Yeah.
It's the furthest thing from your mind. But the only people that make a determination as to whether you are an icon or not is the public.
Your audience. And I think his celebrity was almost accidental. Like, I think very much like Rod Serling with The Twilight Zone. I think Jack Webb was type of character, type of person, thought himself, hey, I'm just a writer. Hey, I'm just a guy that was on the radio. I'm not an actor. What are you talking about? Having me in a TV show of Dragnet. And I think it just kind of all fell in his lap. Success, I think, wasn't something that was maybe planned. It just kind of happened.
Well, it's also, I'm sure, because you do it for such a long time.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that I get from it is, for him, it was a labor of love.
Sure.
I guarantee you, for him, it never felt like work.
It was just what he did. I mean? It was what he did.
Very few of us are blessed with doing for a living, doing what pays the bills for yourself.
Yeah.
And what you are doing that pays those bills is something that you love to do. Very few of us have that opportunity in our lives.
Sure.
But for him, and because he did it for such a long time, it's really obvious that for him, doing Dragnet was a labor of love.
Yeah, and you can tell that too, because not only was Dragnet on the radio for 8 years and became a TV show, and it had all these other things that came after. I mean, it became the thing that he is remembered for. And what I mean, he did other stuff before Dragnet, but all these years later, after he's passed, he is thought of as Dragnet, and I think that's something he was very proud of,
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Just like a musician, is known for this particular album
or song, yeah.
And then that musician gets to go the rest of their lives, being, having people recognize them and giving them, all kinds of positive feedback about what their work, influenced in their lives. Sure. And everything like that.
Yeah.
When you're a musician and you get that, it really makes you feel good. It makes you feel that the work that you put in, really amounted to something.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And for Jack Webb, it's the exact same thing.
And I think, Gar, the reason Dragnet was so successful, whether we're talking about the radio show or the TV shows, is because, it was serious, but it had moments of comedy. I think it found that balance. I mean, could you imagine if Dragnet had been like 100% of a drama and they had no jokes and no comedy, and he was just kind of all serious? It would not have been as successful. But they had the moments of comedy, because every once in a while, we love to watch a TV show and enjoy a good joke and laugh. I think that they found that balance, and that's what made Dragnet the success that it would go on to become.
Well, I also found out that Dragnet is famous or has a feather in their cap.
Okay.
For being the first.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is Dragnet is the first TV show that during the run of the TV show, it was on TV at the time, and a Dragnet movie was released in the theaters at the same time that the show was airing on TV. Up until that point, that had never happened, where a TV show was going on at the same time that the movie was going on in the theaters at the same time.
Yeah, because even
that had never happened before.
Because I think even in the 1960s when they had the Batman movie, that predated the Adam West TV show,
yes,
and that kind of launched the TV series. So I'd never known about this Dragnet movie, but I read the same thing. In fact, I'm going to see if I can find out, get a copy of that, because I would love to get a copy of a movie, be able to watch it, maybe do a feature.
I found it on YouTube.
Oh,
it was
really?
Easy to find.
Wow, I got to go and watch that.
Yes.
And now it says topics for the shows included stuff like bank robberies, kidnappings, and of course murder cases. But they just shoplifting, even check fraud cases. And so they didn't want every week you turn in and somebody's murdered. They try to have different show ideas. So to keep audience, checking in every week.
You gotta. You know what I mean? that would be critical to the longevity.
Yeah, I mean, and I think any radio show at the time, to be on 8 years, you got to be pretty successful. I mean, the audience got to be checking in every week. And it says it was Jack Webb's love for radio drama that kept Dragnet on the radio until 1957. The last 2 seasons, Gar, were repeated episodes. Dragnet was one of the old-time radio shows that ended, as we said at the top of this today, because of the overwhelming popularity of TV.
Yes. And, it's so funny because it's such a mirror of
the internet.
When the internet was introduced.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is a mirror of that because they were saying at that time that TV was a fad and it wasn't going to catch on and all that kind of stuff. And turns out it just winds up taking over and completely overshadowing radio. Exactly the same thing that people were saying about the internet, and it just exploded in popularity.
Yeah.
So, what my point is you really have to, you can't give 100% credibility to the naysayers.
Yeah, I mean, because, as we've talked about many times in many of these episodes, I mean, that's kind of a way of the world. I mean, I can compare it to, like, when all of a sudden the rock bands of the 80s were no longer popular, MTV stopped playing rock videos, and there's nothing but grunge, and all the record companies stopped dropping all the rock bands. We're only going to sign grunge, but it's really the way of the world. You go back to this time we were talking about today from the 40s and the 50s when all these radio shows were just kind of new and they were huge and it was the end thing. And then you get to the point where, okay, there's this new thing, TV, that people can now have in their house. It's the next big thing. You can now, like you were saying, once TV comes along, oh, you know what, I don't have to go to the theater to watch the evening news. I can watch the evening news in the comfort of my own home. And then, the guys like Jack Webb and Lucille Ball that were on the radio back in the day, they're able to transition. Abbott and Costello, we mentioned in many of our episodes. These are people that were able to go from the radio and have a successful career in the movies and TV. And just like anything in life, I guarantee you, Gar, as we sit here, 5 years from now, there's going to be some new huge technical I mean, do you remember as a musician, Gar, when CDs started not being popular, people stopped buying the CDs, and the next big thing, suppose if you remember, was going to be the MP3. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, yes, I remember that, and nobody saw everything going in a complete circle and then circling back to albums. Yeah,
and then we go from like having VHS video cassettes to DVDs, Blu-rays. Now the next thing is 4Ks. I'm sticking with my DVDs though and Blu-rays because 4K is as great as they are. I mean, the video, just to buy the movies, it's like $30.
Well, I just, I bought a 4K video camera that I'm going to use to videotape my next show.
Oh, wow.
So I'm excited about that. I just invested in some new technology just recently.
Wow. And I hope you start posting some of that stuff on the internet if you're able to.
That's exactly why I'm doing it. I've made so many improvements and everything like that, and I wanna get it documented and then splashing it on the internet. So so everybody can see what I'm so excited about.
In fact, you have, I believe, on February 17th. I'm going to go down and catch it because it's not too far from where I live, but you have a show coming up in a couple weeks. You want to let people know real quick so they can...
Yes. I'm going to be playing at the Garden Grove Amphitheater, and the name of the place is Garden Amp.
Now, is it an outdoor venue?
It's in the city of Garden Grove, and if anybody hears this in time and wants tickets, they can always contact me, Gar Borras, through my personal Facebook. And and then I can arrange, for the tickets that will call to be waiting for them, things like that. Now, I will be doing a cutoff as far as accepting requests for tickets, because once it becomes the day of the show, I can't do the preparations for the show and still take care of ticket requests at the same time.
Well, I'll just say this, Gar.
I just have to put on the day of the show, I have to put my focus on the actual show.
We'll just say this so people know, Gar.
So I will be doing a cutoff, before the show, just to allow myself to be able to focus on that and being able to put on a good performance. But, there's so many improvements with the show and everything. It's just going to be a great opportunity for people to see the band really at its best.
Yeah, well, Gar, we'll end on this because this show is going to go up next Saturday, which is February 10th, I believe. So anybody that catches the show next weekend or the next few days after, they'll have a whole week to kind of contact you, which I think is a fair enough amount for people to be able to get in touch with you. And I will end on this, letting people know, besides the Appetite for Destruction, you got what is it, 3 other bands. You got a Kiss tribute, a Poison tribute, I think it's an STP tribute. So it's going to be a great show.
Yeah, all the bands are really good. And I'm just really excited. It's going to be our first time playing at this place, and it's a really nice venue. It's an open air venue. And the place has just got a really, really nice vibe to it.
That'll be cool, because I think by then the rainy weather will be over.
Yeah. This week, it's supposed to rain a lot, so let's get that rain out of the way in advance.
Yeah. and final thing for wrapping up today, want to let the folks know, Gar, next time we do this in a couple of weeks, I think it'll be the week after your concert, we'll be doing this again. We're going to be doing an episode, which I think will be fun because it'll be a little music oriented. The Partridge Family.
Man, the Partridge Family is such great memories for me.
Yeah.
So when we do that one, it really, I have a lot of really wonderful stories to be able to provide for that show.
I can't wait to hear those, Gar, as always. And we'll just say until then, rest in peace, David Cassidy and Shirley Jones. That was a huge favorite of mine back in the day. I still love catching old episodes. So we'll talk all about it. And you take care, Gar. If you could just hold on for a minute, my friend. Take care. Bye-bye.